here today with Lenny Eisenberg. We're going to be discussing the United Teachers of Los Angeles, the union which covers teachers who teach within the Los Angeles Unified School District. If you've been watching the news or listening from the radio, you know that quite a few stories are being circulated regarding reductions in force or losses of teachers, teachers being detained or questioned regarding allegations. And in any of these cases, the primary defense for teachers would be their union, the United Teachers of Los Angeles. So what we're going to ask ourselves today is what UTLA is actually doing to address these issues. Lenny, as it stands from your point of view, is UTLA still functioning as a union?
Well, the question is, has UTLA ever functioned as a union? Because from my way of thinking as a social studies teacher who has studied the labor movement in the United States, the fundamental requirement of any union, as regrettable as it might be, is can they get their rank and file to strike? And UTLA clearly cannot get its rank and file to support any action.
Explain that to us. Why is that the case?
Well, let me give you an example. Several years ago, A.J. Duffy staged a demonstration because of the cuts in teachers, and he set up 3,000 empty chairs in front of the Beaudry site at 333 South Beaudry, so that the administration there could look down and see 3,000 empty chairs. And what Duffy was trying to show is that these were the 3,000 positions that were being lost. What he was showing the then superintendent, Ramon Cortines, at the time is, I cannot get my rank and file into the street. And what this does is it empowers LAUSD to do bad things because it can. In lots of relationships between labor and management, in German unions, German teachers unions, the administration of the schools and the teachers unions negotiate from a position of equality. UTLA sees itself as an adjunct of LAUSD and does nothing, and I've heard this from Dave Higuchi, from John Perez. Most of the previous UTLA presidents say, let's see what the district has to say.
But Lenny, correct me if I'm wrong, it was my understanding that after the strike of 1989, that the union made tremendous inroads into granting rights and more involvement and granting more say to teachers as to what goes on at the school sites and the classrooms. That's just 1989. What happened?
Well, none of it was ever enforced, and you can watch recently where the medical benefits that were negotiated in lieu of salary in 1989 were just given back to the district without any mention of the fact that these were negotiated in lieu of salary. You have a situation where this recent contract that was just negotiated and forced through by Warren Fletcher, if you read it as a lawyer, you realize that every page of this agreement, like all other agreements LAUSD enters into with UTLA and with teachers, are illusory because they allow the district the discretion to ignore the terms of the contract and write itself out. So in public school choice, it uses language that says, unless the principal or the superintendent says otherwise. So they're not bound. If you compare UTLA to a vibrant union in Chicago headed by Karen Lewis, which is now in the process of organizing its rank and file to go out on strike, and it will be able to do this because it has taken the time to organize its rank and file into understanding what the union stands for.
Well,
one last thing, UTLA allows LAUSD to define what it stands for. This is not what a professional union does.
Well, then what would be the difference in the relationship between Karen Lewis and the school district superintendent in Chicago and that of Warren Fletcher in opposition to Ray Cortines or now John Deasy? What's the difference there? Why aren't we seeing the same things taking place?
Well, you're seeing, first of all, one of the major problems, and Karen Lewis herself was a teacher, but for the most part, and let's not look so much at Chicago, let's look at the way teachers unions and other unions work in Europe. They do not have ex-teachers who are escaping the classroom, moving into UTLA in a manner very not dissimilar to the way escaping teachers from no discipline in classrooms are going into LAUSD administration. You either escape the classroom and go into administration at LAUSD, or you escape the classroom and you go into administration at UTLA. If you look at the people who are involved in UTLA, you see people like Paula Parr or Ed Kaz, who have retired from the district and are now double dipping and getting money. What qualifies them to run a union? What makes an ex-social studies teacher capable of running a union? What do they know about labor? What do they know about contracts? Very little. You look at an area rep like Carl Joseph being paid $144,000. This man was disbarred by the State Bar of California, and yet he represents a union.
How do they justify this? My understanding is that an area rep might make somewhere in the range of $90,000. We're talking about someone who's over $50,000 past that mark.
Well, it's a good question, but what you get when you ask questions like this to UTLA is you get silence. You have the new secretary of UTLA, David Lyle. If you look under California teacher credentialing under the name of David Lyle, it shows that he doesn't even have a credential.
But doesn't he claim a 13-year background in teaching?
A 13-year background which no one seems to have any recollection of. So what kind of a union has these kinds of folks running it? And you don't have a choice, because as a teacher under the law, this UTLA is the sole bargaining agent, and you either have the choice of paying them a bargaining agent fee or paying a little more and having them be your union.
What would happen if you sought representation otherwise? For instance, if you were a teacher under duress and you decided not to use the union-retained lawyers, which seem to be representative of the general attitude of the union, and wanted to go out and seek your own representation.
You'd wind up having to pay for it yourself, and what you have to understand is that the law firm of Trickstad, Schwab, and Trickstad, Colleen Schwab, who's the wife of Mr. Schwab, who's the attorney, she sits on the board of directors of UTLA. So
Isn't that a conflict of interest?
It's a conflict of interest, but no one is willing to address it. And you bring this up, you try to talk to the union, you try to talk to Warren Fletcher, you get no response. You send him a registered letter, you get no response. The only way it appears that you can get their attention is by litigating or by going to the NLRB and moving for the decertification of this union.
In respect to that, Lenny, my understanding of this was that during the last citywide election for union officers, that this election was supposed to represent a rebuilding of the union, a refreshing of it, new faces. As far as I can tell, you've just named the only new faces, Warren Fletcher and David Lyle, and you've made it very clear what they represent. To my knowledge, the rest of the officers are Duffy leftovers. Is that not true?
Well, it's not only true, but the truth of it is not as important as the fact that rank and file, at a time where teachers are under a concerted attack, are demoralized. Rank and file teachers are completely and utterly demoralized. When you look at the voting in the last election that put Lyle in, only 17% of rank and file voted, because people feel that UTLA is in collusion to some extent with LAUSD, and it doesn't matter who gets elected as head of that union.
And isn't it also true that among the eligible voters, that a significant proportion of them didn't even know that there was an election going on, and of those that knew, most of them didn't know who was running, and for the most part didn't care? Exactly
the point. This is a sign of demoralization. If you want to have, getting back to the way we started this conversation, I have always been a supporter of unions. I think that if you are a social studies teacher or a person who knows the history of this country, you know what it meant for the working class of this country not to have a union. That being said, what we are seeing across the board is that unions are colluding with management against rank and file. This is something that needs to be stopped. What I'm hoping by these videos and by Per Daily is to create an alternative virtual commons where people can come together and tell their story. If you have a story to tell, this is a place where you can come and tell it at Per Daily. Contact me, Lenny, at perdaily.com, and I would be happy to interview you for this site. Thanks, and look forward to seeing you with our next piece.